obviously I've been a big One Piece fan for 20 years, and what's been interesting to me is seeing the attempts at subverting the community to try and gaslight you into thinking the most popular comic in the world is somehow not actually that popular, and how it's a big cope. I'm always seeing people like do this thing where like, well, actually, only older people care about One Piece, because it's almost like this series has been running for 30 years or something. I'm seeing people do this thing where like, well, Oda fell off post time skip. I'm seeing people like do this thing where they're like, well, eventually something's gonna outdo One Piece. Like, bro, in 2012, I was being told that My Hero Academia was bigger than One Piece. Okay, that it would destroy One Piece. And what happened? Like, the hack who wrote it, like, burned out in a decade, couldn't even end it well. Nobody talks about My Hero anymore, outside of, like, what a huge waste of potential it was. And, now One Piece is still going strong. Like, am I really supposed to believe that, like, Black Clover or Jujutsu Kaisen or, like, freaking Witch Watch is gonna outperform One Piece? It's not gonna happen. Okay, I am not aware of any other mainstream manga that's like has as good long-term storytelling and payoff as One Piece. That's just the reality of it. I can't think of anything else that has this many characters, that grows and evolves this much, that's on a regular schedule. Like, I keep seeing people do this thing where they're like, well, yeah, Hunter x Hunter is better. Hunter x Hunter is like 400 chapters long. Like, what Hunter x Hunter chapter have you read this year? Okay, Hunter x Hunter, like, objectively has this very big, very glaring problem with the lore, with the manga. Like, the fact that you don't get new chapters, and, everyone just ignores it. Everyone wants to do this thing where, like, well, when we do get chapters, they're peak. And it's just this weird, obsessive fan culture thing, honestly. Like, again, it's so frustrating seeing, like, manga like that or Berserk get hyped up as being, like, way better than One Piece, when in actuality, like, One Piece just does so much better. It's very interesting, honestly, because I keep seeing people do this thing where they're like, oh yeah, Oda retcons things. He just makes stuff up on the fly, and like it's always like weird stuff that people don't understand. For example, hockey. Like I've seen people argue that like hockey wasn't built up and it just kind of came out of nowhere, and I'm just like, we saw it for the first time in Skypiea. Shanks arguably used it in chapter 1. Okay, like, you have all of these, you have, like, all these, like, hints and foreshadowing of what's to come. And people do this thing of, like, oh, yeah, like, Oda just made up some bullshit and then fleshed it out later. It's just like, who are you trying to fool? Like, who are you trying to fool? Like, my favorite, we saw this with, like, Joy Boy and, like, Gear 5, Nika, and stuff like that. People seriously tried to argue that, like, it was a retcon that Luffy's fruit was not a Paramythia. But you can actually go back and you can see how, like, it doesn't behave like an actual Paramythia, like, as we understand it. It's you have foreshadowing, again, Skypiea kind of set this up, like, there are all these examples of just, like, how One Piece just does a masterful job of, like, world building, setting up characters, and establishing, like, future plot lines and character bits. Like, sometimes you don't get payoffs for, like, hundreds of chapters, and that's kind of led to what I think the core issue actually is that the people who are complaining about One Piece, who are complaining about things like, say, characters never dying, which is a really hilarious complaint to have in a series that killed off Ace, in a pivotal scene. Like whenever you see people complaining about One Piece, you really get this vibe that these people either have not read it or that they didn't understand it at all. Like, you're always seeing people do this thing where they're like, oh yeah, I can't take this this comic about a guy becoming a cartoon character and beating up a dragon seriously. And I'm just like, what do you mean by that? Like again, it's like people have this obsession with just like finding finding anything to complain about because of the tone of the series, because of the stylistic choices, because of like creative decisions, things that like all make perfect sense, like in the context of the series itself. But like, you know, certain people want to go like, well, like there isn't enough rape in it, like it's not dark enough, you know, in a series literally about genocide. Like it's like it is downright absurd how many people try and tell you desperately that like One Piece isn't that good and it's overrated, and yet they can't seem to cite another series that's as good as it. I've actually like thought about this recently, and I do think it's true. I can't think of like any Western fantasy property that's as good as One Piece. Okay, you know, A Song of Ice and Fire isn't as good. Lord of the Rings isn't as good. Harry Potter didn't go on as long. Like Harry Potter's like better, but it was also over in like a decade, right? Like it had a more cohesive type plot that ended, but I think considering like how long One Piece has been going, like, can anyone name like an epic fantasy series that's like gone on this long, that's been this successful, that's like has more nuance and depth to it than One Piece? Like, I don't think there is one. Like I seriously do think this at this point is that One Piece kind of has surpassed Western fantasy literature, and right now we just don't really have a lot of people who are willing to acknowledge that, because the idea that a comic could outdo actual full-length fantasy epics, like, to a lot of literary people is laughable. But I do think it's true, because I do think One Piece encompasses more traditional themes. I think it's more timeless. I would say it's probably one of the most culturally significant properties this decade. And the whole idea of like laughing it off just because it's a comic is, to me, I think is disrespectful to the art form and to the creators. Like I very much enjoy One Piece and look back on like experiencing it for the first time as being one of like the greatest things that have ever happened to me in a lot of ways. And I feel like millions of fans worldwide feel the same way. And so it's very, very, to me, it's very, very disgusting how certain individuals are doing everything they can to try and downplay this property, to ignore it, to try and say it's woke, to try and make it to be about something it isn't, you know? Like, again, we keep seeing this over and over again, and I suppose this is, like, the nature of entertainment and, like, media, is that it keeps getting warped for, like, evil purposes, you know? It keeps being, like, misrepresented to, like, push an agenda, because, of course, like, you know, the Western publishing industry doesn't want to admit that they've been outperformed by a fucking comic, okay? Of course they don't want to admit that. Of course they don't want to admit One Piece is better than Lord of the Rings, because that would be like that would be an epic fail on their part. Like, how is this possible? To me, I feel as if we really do need to push back more against these kind of criticisms of One Piece. You know, we need to push back more against this idea that this manga is somehow lesser because of the tone, the art style, and especially the fact that it's a comic, okay? This thing is awesome, and we really do need to celebrate its cultural appeal and long-lasting relevancy going forward. I find it interesting, honestly. One of the things we're seeing a lot of now is that a lot of people are trying to tell you that once we know what the One Piece is, once the final panel is published, that's going to somehow, like, ruin the experience of reading it for the first time for people who come after. And I suppose it is, like, kind of, we're in a fortunate time where we get to read this week to week and see what's happening and see the story develop, like, organically, like, the way it was meant to be read. But, like, I think when people say that when we know what the One Piece is, it's going to kill the core appeal of the series, I feel like people are very much underestimating just how good the rest of the series is. You know how engaging each area is, how each individual plot line and character just resonates with people, and how like it keeps evolving and growing over time. Again, I think when the series is over, people will start appreciating individual arcs more. We'll start appreciating certain sequences more. Like again, it'll kind of appreciate in time. Like in a lot of ways, people will understand how peak One Piece actually was when it's actually over, and it's going to be very interesting to see when that happens. But right now, it does need to be said is in spite of One Piece's success, it does need to be understood that One Piece is in fact quite a bit better than a lot of people make it sound.